When Evelyn Cross collapsed on the streets of Red Hollow, bleeding and broken, the entire town stopped to stare. But only one man moved. Luke Carver didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for permission. He simply claimed her, right there in the dust and whispers, as if she'd always belonged to him. What the town didn't know was that Evelyn had survived an attack that should have killed her. And what Luke didn't know was that saving her would cost him everything he thought he understood about safety, trust, and love. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Evelyn's journey travels. The stagecoach rattled into Red Hollow 3 days late, covered in dust so thick it looked like the desert itself had tried to swallow it whole. The driver's face was gray, his hands shaking as he pulled the horses to a stop outside the trading post. He didn't call out the usual arrival. He didn't joke with the men waiting for supplies. He just sat there, staring at nothing, until someone finally climbed up to ask what had happened. "Bandits," he said, his voice cracked on the word. 2 days out. They took everything. The crowd pressed closer. Red Hollow wasn't used to trouble that came with blood attached. Disputes over water rights, yes. Fistfights outside the saloon, certainly. But bandits hitting a passenger coach? That was the kind of danger people moved west to escape, only to find it waiting for them anyway. "Anyone hurt?" the blacksmith asked. The driver's jaw worked for a moment before he could answer. "One passenger, woman, she's inside." The door to the coach hung crooked on its hinges. The wood splintered where something, or someone, had forced it open. When the driver climbed down and pulled it wider, the smell hit first. Blood, sweat, and fear, all baked together in the confined space. A few of the women in the crowd turned away. The men leaned in. Evelyn Cross sat slumped against the far wall of the coach, her traveling dress torn at the shoulder and stained rust-brown down the front. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white, and her face was turned toward the window as if she couldn't bear to look at the people gathering to stare. A bruise darkened her left cheek, spreading up toward her temple, and her lip was split, the dried blood cracking when she finally took a breath deep enough to matter. She didn't move when the driver spoke her name. She didn't acknowledge the gasps from the crowd or the way conversation stopped mid-sentence. She just sat there, perfectly still, like a woman who'd learned that stillness was the only armor left. "Miss Cross," the driver said again, quieter this time. "We're here. Red Hollow." Evelyn's eyes closed briefly, and something in her expression shifted, not relief exactly, but a kind of grim resignation. She reached for the edge of the door frame, her fingers trembling, and tried to pull herself upright. Her legs buckled the moment her weight shifted. She caught herself on the coach's splintered door frame, her breath coming fast and shallow, and for a moment it looked like sheer stubbornness might be enough to hold her up. It wasn't. She pitched forward, and the crowd sucked in a collective breath, already stepping back, already deciding this wasn't their problem, already whispering about propriety and scandal and what kind of woman travels alone anyway. But Luke Carver didn't step back. He pushed through this cluster of onlookers like they weren't there, his boots kicking up dust, his broad shoulders cutting a path straight to the coach. He reached Evelyn just as her knees gave out completely, catching her weight against his chest before she could hit the ground. Her head lolled against his shoulder, a soft sound escaping her throat. Not quite pain, not quite protest, just the last bit of air leaving someone who'd been holding their breath for days. "I've got you," Luke said. His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that didn't ask for belief. It simply stated fact. "You're safe now." Evelyn's fingers curled weakly into the fabric of his shirt, and her eyes opened just enough to find his face. She didn't speak. Maybe she couldn't. But something in her gaze, something raw and desperate and still fighting, told him she'd heard. The crowd started murmuring immediately. "Who is she? What happened to her? Should have stayed on the coach till someone fetched the doc." "Luke, you can't just—" "Yes, I can." Luke's voice cut through the noise like a blade, sharp enough that even the loudest gossip shut her mouth. He adjusted Evelyn's weight in his arms, cradling her carefully, and turned to face the crowd with an expression that dared anyone to argue. "She's with me. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me later." Silence dropped over the street like a heavy blanket. A few people exchanged glances. Someone muttered something Luke couldn't quite hear, but he didn't care. He was already moving, carrying Evelyn toward the doctor's office at the end of the street, her blood soaking slowly into his shirt, her breathing uneven against his collarbone. Behind him, the whispers started up again, louder this time. Did he just claim her? In front of everyone? He doesn't even know her. Doesn't matter. You saw what he did. That's as good as a declaration. Poor girl doesn't even know what she's gotten herself into. Luke didn't slow down. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, steady and sure, with Evelyn's fragile weight in his arms and the whole town's judgment pressing against his back like a physical thing. He'd deal with the talk later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman who'd stopped breathing quite so fast, whose fingers had gone slack against his chest, whose trust, however thin and fragile, he refused to break. The doctor's office sat at the end of a narrow side street, marked only by a weathered sign that read T. Brennan, Physician, in faded black letters. Luke kicked the door open without bothering to knock, startling the gray-haired man bent over a mortar and pestle at a cluttered workbench. Dr. Brennan looked up sharply, his mouth already opening to deliver a lecture about manners, but the words died when he saw Evelyn. He was around the bench in 3 strides, his hands already reaching for her wrist to check her pulse. What happened? Bandits hit the stage 2 days out, Luke said. Driver said they took everything. She's been like this since they got here. Brennan's jaw tightened. He gestured toward the exam table in the corner, a simple wooden platform covered with a thin sheet. Put her there. Gently. Luke crossed the room and lowered Evelyn onto the table as carefully as he could, but even that small movement made her gasp, her body curling instinctively inward. Brennan was already pulling supplies from a cabinet, clean cloth, a brown bottle of carbolic acid, a needle and thread. You know her? Brennan asked without looking up. No? Then why? Because no one else was going to. Luke's tone left no room for debate. He stepped back to give the doctor space, but didn't move toward the door. She needs help. I'm staying. Brennan glanced at him, one eyebrow raised, but he didn't argue. He'd known Luke Carver long enough to recognize when the man had made up his mind about something. Instead, he turned his attention to Evelyn, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he began cutting away the torn fabric of her dress to assess the damage. Miss, Brennan said gently, his voice pitched low and calm. Can you hear me? I'm Dr. Brennan. You're safe here. I need to look at your injuries. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first, then barely a whisper. They took everything. I know, Brennan said. But you're here now. Let me help you. She didn't resist as he worked, but she didn't relax either. Every touch made her flinch, every movement a reminder of whatever had happened out there on the road. Luke watched from the corner, his hands clenched at his sides, fury building hot and tight in his chest. He'd seen injuries before. Ranch work was dangerous and accidents happened. But this was different. This was deliberate. Someone had done this to her. Someone had left her like this. Brennan cleaned the worst of the cuts, his expression darkening with each new injury he uncovered. Bruised ribs, he muttered, more to himself than to Luke. Possible concussion, lacerations on her arms and hands, defensive wounds, looks like. She fought back. Will she be all right? Luke asked. Physically? Yes, with time and rest. Brennan's hands paused, and he looked up at Luke with something heavy in his eyes. But trauma like this, it doesn't heal the same way a broken bone does. She's going to need more than bandages. Luke nodded slowly. He understood that. He'd seen men come back from war with wounds no one could see, scars that never showed on the surface but changed everything underneath. What does she need? Safety, stability. Someone who won't push her before she's ready. Brennan finished wrapping a bandage around Evelyn's arm and straightened, wiping his hands on a towel. You planning to provide that? Yes. Even though you don't know her? Especially because I don't know her. Luke met the doctor's gaze steadily. If I knew her, people might think I had some other reason. This way, there's no question. I'm doing it because it's right. Brennan studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But you need to understand something, Luke. The town's going to talk. They're going to assume things, and if you bring her to your ranch without a chaperone, they'll assume the worst. Let them. I'm serious. This could ruin her reputation before she even has a chance to. Then I'll make sure she has a chaperone. Luke's voice was firm, final. Mrs. Holloway. She's worked for me before and she's beyond reproach. If that'll keep the gossips quiet, fine. But I'm not leaving her to face this alone. Brennan sighed, but there was approval in the sound. You're a stubborn man, Luke Carver. So I've been told. Evelyn stirred on the table, her eyes opening wider now, more focused. She looked between the two men, confusion and wariness warring in her expression. Where? Red Hollow, Luke said, stepping closer. You're at the doctor's office. You collapsed when you got off the stage. Her hand moved to her ribs, pressing gently, and she winced. I remember. The coach. Her voice broke and she turned her face away. They took everything. We'll get it back, Luke said. It was a promise he had no right to make, but he made it anyway. And until then, you're not alone. Evelyn's gaze snapped back to him, sharp despite the exhaustion. You don't know me. No, but that doesn't change anything. It should. Her words were bitter, edged with something that might have been anger or grief or both. You don't owe me anything. No one does. I'm not doing this because I owe you, Luke said quietly. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because you deserve better than what happened to you. Evelyn stared at him, and for a moment Luke thought she might argue, but then something in her expression cracked, just slightly, just enough, and she looked away again, her shoulders sagging. I don't have anywhere else to go. Then you'll come with me. Luke kept his voice steady, matter of fact, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. My ranch. It's quiet, safe, and Mrs. Holloway will stay with you, so there's no question about propriety. Why are you doing this? The question came out raw, almost desperate. I could be anyone. I could be. You're someone who needs help, Luke interrupted gently. That's all I need to know. Evelyn's throat worked as she swallowed hard. She looked like she wanted to argue, to push back against the kindness being offered, but she was too tired, too hurt, too worn down by everything that had already happened. Finally, she nodded once, a tiny movement that cost her more than Luke could probably guess. All right, Brennan cleared his throat. She needs rest before she goes anywhere. A few hours at least, and I want to check on her again tomorrow. I'll bring her back, Luke promised. He looked at Evelyn. Get some sleep. I'll be right outside. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. Mr. Carver? Luke looked back. Evelyn's eyes were shadowed, haunted, but there was something else there too. Something fragile and uncertain, but trying hard to hold on. Thank you. Luke nodded once. You're welcome, Miss Cross. He stepped outside and closed the door quietly behind him, leaving Evelyn to the doctor's care. The street was emptier now, most of the crowd having dispersed to spread the news of what had happened. A few stragglers lingered near the trading post, their voices carrying in the still afternoon air. Can you believe he just took her like that? Bold as brass, didn't even ask permission. She didn't look like she was in any condition to refuse. Exactly. Makes you wonder what he's really after. Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Let them wonder. Let them talk. It didn't change what needed to be done. He pulled his hat lower and started walking toward the general store, already making a mental list of what Evelyn would need. Clean clothes, basic supplies, something to replace what the bandits had stolen. He'd cover it for now. They could sort out the details later, once she was strong enough to think about the future. The store was dim and cool inside, smelling of leather and soap and the faint sweetness of dried apples. Martha Green, the shopkeeper's wife, looked up from behind the counter, her expression carefully neutral. Luke, heard you had some excitement today. Need to buy some things, Luke said, ignoring the implicit question. He gestured toward the shelves lined with women's goods. Dress, underthings, shoes, something simple and practical. Martha's eyebrows rose. For the woman from the stage? Yes. You know her size. Luke hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Average, I'd guess. Maybe a little on the tall side. Slender build. Martha studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll put together a few options. You planning to bring her by to choose herself? Not yet. She's resting at the doc's office. I see. Martha moved toward the back of the store, pulling items from shelves with practiced efficiency. She didn't ask more questions, but Luke could feel the weight of her curiosity pressing against his back. When she returned, her arms were full of neatly folded fabric. "This should do for now. You want them wrapped?" "Please." She set to work, her hands quick and sure. As she tied the brown paper package with twine, she finally spoke again, her voice quieter now. "People are going to talk, Luke, you know that." "I know. They're going to say things about her, about you, about what you're doing." "Let them." Martha finished the knot and slid the package across the counter. "Just be careful, both of you. This town isn't always kind to people it doesn't understand." Luke met her eyes. "Then maybe it's time this town learned to do better." He paid for the supplies and carried the package back toward the doctor's office, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The light turned everything golden, softening the harsh edges of the street, making Red Hollow look almost peaceful. But Luke knew better. Peace was fragile out here. It could break as easily as trust, as quickly as safety, as completely as the life Evelyn had been trying to start when the bandits tore it apart. When he reached the doctor's office, Brennan was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "She's sleeping," Brennan said before Luke could ask. "Finally. But she's restless. Nightmares, probably." Luke's chest tightened. "How long before she can travel?" "An hour or two, maybe less if she's determined." Brennan pushed off the wall and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Luke, I meant what I said earlier. She's fragile right now. Be patient with her." "I will. And if she changes her mind about going with you, then I'll bring her back here," Luke said firmly. "Or wherever else she wants to go. I'm not keeping her prisoner." Brennan nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because that girl's been through enough. She doesn't need someone else trying to control her life." While Luke understood what the doctor wasn't saying, that Evelyn had already lost her autonomy once, out there on the road with the bandits, that taking it away again, even with good intentions, would only make things worse. "I'll remember that." Brennan clapped him on the shoulder and went back inside, leaving Luke alone with his thoughts and the package of supplies balanced on his knee. He sat down on the bench outside the office, tipping his hat forward to shade his eyes, and waited. The town moved around him, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in its midst. Wagons rattled past. Children ran through the street, laughing. Somewhere a dog barked, the sound sharp and bright in the cooling air. Life continued, ordinary and relentless, while inside that office a woman tried to piece herself back together from fragments. Luke had never been a patient man. Ranch work didn't leave room for it. There was always something that needed fixing, some crisis demanding immediate attention. But he could be patient now. He would be, because Evelyn Cross had already been rushed and pushed and broken by circumstances beyond her control. The least he could do was give her time. The sun had dropped below the roofline when the door finally opened and Brennan stepped out, followed by Evelyn. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand pressed to her ribs. She'd been cleaned up, the worst of the blood washed away, her hair pulled back into a simple braid. But the bruises stood out starkly against her pale skin, and the way she held herself spoke of pain barely contained. Luke stood immediately, the package forgotten on the bench. "Miss Cross." Evelyn looked at him, and this time there was something different in her eyes. Not trust, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. The first fragile thread of belief that maybe, just maybe, she'd landed somewhere safe. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Luke nodded and offered his arm, careful not to crowd her, giving her space to refuse if she wanted. After a moment's hesitation, Evelyn took it, her fingers resting lightly on his sleeve. Together they started down the street toward where Luke's wagon waited, Brennan following a few steps behind with his medical bag in case Evelyn needed anything on the journey. People stopped to stare as they passed. Luke felt the weight of their gazes, heard the whispers starting up again, but he kept his focus forward, his pace steady and slow to match Evelyn's careful steps. She didn't look at anyone. She just kept her eyes on the ground ahead, concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other, on not collapsing again, on making it just a little bit further. When they reached the wagon, Luke helped her up onto the seat, his hand steady and impersonal, giving her nothing to fear. He retrieved the package from the bench and set it beside her, then climbed up and took the reins. Brennan handed up a small bottle. Laudanum, the doctor said. Small doses only, and only if the pain gets too bad. And Luke, I'll expect to see her tomorrow. You will. Brennan stepped back and Luke released the brake. The wagon rolled forward, wheels creaking, and Red Hollow began to fall away behind them. Evelyn sat stiffly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the ranch waited. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was full, weighted with everything unsaid, everything still too raw to name. Finally, as the town disappeared from view and the open prairie stretched out ahead of them, Evelyn broke it. Why did you do that? Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the sound of the wheels and the horses' hooves. Back there, in front of everyone. You didn't have to claim me like that. Luke considered his answer carefully. No, I didn't have to. But I wanted to. Why? Because you needed someone to stand with you. And because I've seen what happens when people turn away from someone who needs help. I won't be part of that. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, they're going to say things about me. About us. Probably. Doesn't that bother you? Luke glanced at her, catching the fear beneath the question. The worry that she'd become a burden, a source of shame, something to be hidden or regretted. No. What bothers me is that you had to go through what you did. The rest is just noise. Evelyn's throat worked as she swallowed. She looked down at her hands, at the bandages wrapped around her palms where she'd tried to fight back. I don't know how to repay you for this. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Luke thought about that. What was he asking? Not for gratitude, not for obligation, just, I'm asking you to rest, to heal, to let yourself be safe for a while, that's all. Evelyn turned to look at him fully, and Luke saw the exact moment something in her shifted, when the defensive walls came down just slightly, when she allowed herself to believe that maybe he meant what he said. All right, she whispered, I can do that. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind now. Easier, less fraught. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the ranch appeared on the horizon, a sturdy house, a barn, fences marking out pastures where horses grazed peacefully. It looked solid, permanent, safe. When Luke pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, Evelyn didn't move immediately. She just sat there, taking it in, maybe trying to convince herself it was real. Come on, Luke said gently. Let's get you inside. He helped her down, and this time when she stumbled, he was ready. He caught her weight easily, steadying her until she found her balance. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd caught her collapsing in the street, Evelyn Cross smiled, small and tentative and fragile as spun glass, but real. Thank you, she said again. And Luke, who'd never been good with words, who preferred action over empty promises, simply nodded. You're home now. That's all that matters. He didn't know if she believed him yet, but he'd make sure she did. One day, one moment, one act of steady kindness at a time, he'd prove to Evelyn Cross that she'd landed somewhere she could finally stop running, somewhere she could heal, somewhere she could, eventually, belong. The door to the house opened, and Mrs. Holloway stepped out onto the porch, her round face creased with concern. Luke Carver, what in heaven's name? She stopped when she saw Evelyn, her expression softening immediately. Oh, you poor dear. Come inside quickly now. Let's get you settled. Evelyn let herself be ushered forward, too tired to resist, too grateful for the warmth in the older woman's voice. Luke followed behind, carrying the package of supplies, watching as Mrs. Holloway guided Evelyn toward the guest room with gentle hands and soothing words. And as the door closed behind them, leaving Luke alone in the gathering darkness, he made himself a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would make sure Evelyn Cross never had to face the world alone again. The first night at the ranch, Evelyn didn't sleep. She lay in the guest room Mrs. Holloway had prepared, clean sheets, a patchwork quilt, curtains that smelled faintly of lavender, and stared at the ceiling while her body remembered every jolt of the attack, every moment of helplessness. The darkness pressed close, and every creak of the house settling made her flinch. She'd pulled the quilt up to her chin despite the warmth, needing the weight of it, the illusion of protection. When dawn finally broke, pale light filtering through the curtains, Evelyn heard movement in the kitchen. Low voices, the clatter of dishes, the smell of coffee drifting under her door. She sat up slowly, testing her ribs, and found the pain had dulled to a persistent ache rather than the sharp agony of yesterday. Progress, she supposed. Small, but real. She dressed carefully in one of the garments Luke had purchased, a simple gray dress that fit well enough, though it hung loose at the waist. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser showed a stranger. Hollow-eyed, bruised, hair falling in tangles she didn't have the energy to fix properly. She looked like someone who'd survived something. She supposed that was accurate. When she emerged from the bedroom, Mrs. Holloway was at the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. The older woman turned at the sound of Evelyn's footsteps, her face breaking into a warm smile that didn't quite hide her concern. "There you are, dear. Come sit. You need to eat something." Evelyn moved to the table, lowering herself into a chair with care. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, for staying, for all of this." "Oh, hush now." Mrs. Holloway ladled oatmeal into a bowl and set it in front of Evelyn, along with a cup of coffee. Luke explained what happened. Terrible business, those bandits. You're safe here, and that's what matters. She paused, her expression growing serious. "How are you feeling? Truthfully now." Evelyn considered lying, offering some polite reassurance, but something in Mrs. Holloway's eyes told her the woman would see right through it. "Sore. Tired. Afraid to close my eyes." Mrs. Holloway nodded as if she'd expected exactly that answer. "That's natural after what you've been through. It'll get easier, but it takes time. You just focus on healing and let us worry about the rest." "Where's Mr. Carver?" "Out checking the fences. He'll be back for breakfast shortly." Mrs. Holloway poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from Evelyn. "He's a good man, Luke is. Doesn't say much, but when he gives his word, he keeps it. You can trust him." Evelyn wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, absorbing its warmth. "I don't understand why he's doing this. He doesn't know me. I could be anyone." "That's exactly why he's doing it," Mrs. Holloway said gently. "Because you're not anyone to him. You're someone who needed help, and Luke's never been able to turn away from that. Lost his own family when he was young, parents to fever, sister to childbirth complications. He knows what it's like to need someone to stand with you when the world feels like it's ending." Evelyn absorbed this, seeing Luke Carver in a slightly different light. Not just the stern rancher who'd caught her when she fell, but someone who understood loss. Someone who'd chosen kindness deliberately, not out of obligation, but because he knew what the absence of it cost. The door opened, and Luke himself stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of horses and morning air. He removed his hat, his gaze finding Evelyn immediately. "Miss Cross, you're up." "I am." Evelyn straightened in her chair, suddenly self-conscious. "Good morning." "Morning." Luke moved to the basin to wash his hands, his movements economical and practiced. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday." "That's something." He dried his hands and joined them at the table, accepting the plate of eggs and biscuits Mrs. Holloway set before him. For a moment they ate in silence, the quiet punctuated only by the clink of forks and the distant sound of horses in the corral. Finally, Luke set down his coffee cup and looked at Evelyn directly. "We need to talk about what happens next." Evelyn's stomach tightened. Here it was. The moment where the kindness ended and conditions appeared. She'd been waiting for it, bracing for it, knowing that nothing in life came without cost. "All right. The bandits are still out there," Luke said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Sheriff got word this morning that they hit another coach 40 miles south. Took everything, left 2 people injured. They're getting bolder." Mrs. Holloway made a disgusted sound. "Animals." "The sheriff's putting together a posse to track them down," Luke continued. "He asked me to ride with them." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. "When?" "Tomorrow at dawn. Could be gone 3 days, maybe 4. "And you're going?" It wasn't a question. Luke's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes, I am." "Why?" The word came out sharper than Evelyn intended. "You've done enough already. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Luke's voice was quiet but unyielding. Those men took something from you. They hurt you, and now they're hurting other people. If I can help stop that, I'm going to. Evelyn stared at him, anger and fear warring in her chest. Anger that he would leave her so soon, that he would risk himself for strangers, that he couldn't just let it go. And fear, bone-deep, paralyzing fear that he wouldn't come back, that she'd lose the one person who'd stood between her and the world's judgment before she'd even had time to learn his full story. "You could be killed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could be." Luke held her gaze steadily. "But sitting here doing nothing while they hurt more people, that would kill something in me that matters more." Mrs. Holloway reached over and patted Evelyn's hand. "Luke's good at what he does, dear, and he won't be going alone. The sheriff's gathering the best men in 3 counties. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to demand that he stay, that he let someone else handle it, that he not abandon her when she was still trying to find solid ground. But she saw the resolution in his face and knew it would be pointless. Luke Carver had made his decision, and nothing she said would change it. "What about the ranch?" she asked instead. "And Mrs. Holloway?" "Mrs. Holloway will stay with you the whole time," Luke said, "and my foreman Tom will be here during the day to handle anything that needs doing. You'll be safe." "Will I?" Evelyn didn't mean to say it aloud, but the words escaped anyway, raw and honest. "Will any of us be safe until those men are caught?" Luke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's why I'm going. To make sure the answer to that question is yes." Evelyn looked down at her plate, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. She understood his reasoning. She even respected it, in a way. But understanding didn't make the fear any less real, didn't make the thought of him riding into danger any easier to bear. "You should eat," Mrs. Holloway said gently, breaking the tension. "Both of you. No sense facing the day on an empty stomach." They finished breakfast in stilted silence, and afterward Luke excused himself to prepare for the journey. Evelyn helped Mrs. Holloway with the dishes, grateful for something to do with her hands, some task that required focus, and kept the spiraling thoughts at bay. "He'll come back," Mrs. Holloway said as they worked. "I know you're worried, but Luke survived worse than a few bandits." "How can you be sure?" "Because he's stubborn." Mrs. Holloway smiled slightly. "And because he gave you his word that you'd be safe here. Luke doesn't make promises he can't keep." Evelyn wanted to believe that, wanted to have the same certainty Mrs. Holloway possessed, but all she could think about was the moment the bandits had surrounded the coach, the moment she'd realized no one was coming to help, the moment she'd understood that safety was an illusion people told themselves to sleep at night. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small tasks and careful rest. Evelyn sat on the porch for a while, watching the horses graze and trying to absorb the peace of the landscape, the rolling hills, the endless sky, the quality of silence that felt almost sacred. Mrs. Holloway brought her mending and sat nearby, occasionally offering gentle conversation, but mostly just providing steady, undemanding presence. As the sun began its descent, Luke returned from whatever preparations he'd been making. He looked tired, Evelyn thought, but determined. He joined them on the porch, lowering himself into the chair beside Evelyn with a quiet sigh. "Everything ready?" Mrs. Holloway asked. "As ready as it'll be." Luke glanced at Evelyn. "Can we talk, just for a minute?" Evelyn nodded, and Mrs. Holloway tactfully excused herself, disappearing into the house with her basket of mending. When they were alone, Luke turned slightly in his chair to face Evelyn more directly. "I know you're scared," he said without preamble, "and I know my leaving doesn't help with that, but I need you to understand something." "What?" "I'm not doing this lightly, and I'm not doing it to abandon you." His voice was rough with something Evelyn couldn't quite name. "But those men need to be stopped, and if I don't go, if I stay here knowing I could have helped and didn't, I won't be able to live with myself. Does that make sense?" Evelyn studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the complete absence of doubt in his expression. "Yes," she said finally. "It does." "Good." Luke relaxed slightly. "Tom will be here every morning by dawn. He knows to check in with you and Mrs. Holloway, make sure everything's secure. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you send him straight to town for the deputy. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourselves. We won't. I mean it, Evelyn. The use of her first name startled them both slightly, the intimacy of it unexpected. Luke cleared his throat. If something happens, if you need help, you get it. Promise me. I promise. Luke nodded, satisfied. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sky shift from gold to pink to deep purple. Finally, Luke stood, offering Evelyn his hand to help her up. She took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. I'll be back, he said quietly. That's a promise I intend to keep. Evelyn looked up at him, this man who'd become her unlikely anchor in the space of a single day, and made herself believe him. I'll be here. Luke's expression softened just slightly. Then he released her hand and stepped back, breaking the moment before it could become something neither of them was ready to name. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard. He was right about that. Evelyn barely slept again that night, and when dawn came, cold and gray and too early, she stood at the window and watched Luke ride out with 5 other men, their silhouettes dark against the lightening sky. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, willing him to turn around, to look back just once. But he didn't. He just kept riding until he disappeared over the rise, and then he was gone. Come away from the window, dear, Mrs. Holloway said gently from the doorway. Standing there won't bring him back any faster. But Evelyn couldn't move. Not yet. She needed to see that empty horizon, needed to accept that Luke was gone and she was here, and all she could do was wait. The first day without Luke felt impossibly long. Tom arrived at dawn as promised, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and few words. He checked the perimeter, tended the horses, and made himself available for anything Mrs. Holloway or Evelyn might need. But mostly he kept to himself, giving them space. Evelyn tried to make herself useful. She helped with small chores, folding laundry, shelling peas, sweeping the porch, but her body still ached and her mind kept wandering to where Luke might be, what he might be facing, whether he was safe. Mrs. Holloway watched her with patient concern, occasionally coaxing her to sit down and rest, to drink tea, to eat something. You'll worry yourself sick, Mrs. Holloway said that afternoon, finding Evelyn standing at the window again, staring out at nothing. And that won't help anyone. I can't help it, Evelyn admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see what those men did. And now Luke's out there hunting them, and her voice broke. I can't stop thinking about what might happen. Mrs. Holloway crossed the room and wrapped an arm around Evelyn's shoulders. I know, but you survived what they did to you. You're here, standing, breathing, healing. That takes strength, dear. Don't underestimate yourself. I don't feel strong, Evelyn whispered. I feel broken. Broken things can be mended. Mrs. Holloway's voice was firm but gentle. And sometimes they come back stronger than before. You'll see. Evelyn wanted to believe her. She truly did. But right now, with Luke gone and the bandits still out there somewhere and her own future so uncertain, strength felt like something that belonged to other people. People who hadn't been left bleeding in a stagecoach, who hadn't had to rely on a stranger's mercy just to survive. The second day was worse. Word came at noon via a rider passing through. The posse had picked up the bandits' trail heading northwest toward the mountains. They were close, the rider said, maybe a day behind. There'd been no violence yet, no confrontation, just tracking and careful pursuit. But everyone knew it was coming. The question was when, and whether anyone would get hurt when it did. Evelyn felt sick after the rider left. She spent the afternoon on the porch, wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth, trying to breathe through the anxiety that made her chest feel too tight. Mrs. Holloway sat with her, knitting quietly, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of Evelyn's thoughts. Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Holloway said after a while. Where were you coming from when the bandits attacked? Evelyn blinked, pulled back from her spiraling worry. St. Louis. I was traveling to meet my aunt in Sacramento. She's the only family I have left. That's a long journey. Yes. Evelyn pulled the shawl tighter. My parents died last year. Influenza. I tried to manage on my own for a while, but she trailed off, not wanting to detail the series of small failures that had led her west. The job she couldn't keep, the boarding house she couldn't afford, the slow realization that staying meant drowning.
My aunt offered me a place, a fresh start. And instead you ended up here, Mrs. Holloway said gently. Instead, I ended up here. Evelyn managed a bitter smile. Not exactly the fresh start I imagined. No, Mrs. Holloway agreed, but maybe it's the one you needed. Evelyn looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Just that sometimes the path we think we're supposed to take and the path we actually need are two different things. Mrs. Holloway's needles clicked steadily, her gaze on her work. Your aunt in Sacramento might have been a safe choice, but safe isn't always the same as right. And you think Red Hollow is right? Evelyn's voice held more skepticism than she'd intended. I think Luke Carver standing up for you in front of the whole town was right, Mrs. Holloway said calmly. I think you being here, safe and cared for instead of alone and judged, is right. What happens after that? Well, that's up to you and Luke to figure out. Evelyn wanted to argue, but she found she couldn't, because underneath all the fear and uncertainty, there was a tiny kernel of something else, something that felt almost like hope. The idea that maybe, just maybe, landing in Red Hollow wasn't the disaster it had seemed, that maybe this accidental detour could become something more, if Luke came back. The thought circled back, relentless as a hawk, and Evelyn closed her eyes against it. He had to come back. He'd promised. And Mrs. Holloway said Luke kept his promises. She had to believe that. The third day dawned with heavy clouds and the smell of rain in the air. Evelyn woke to thunder rumbling in the distance and the sound of Mrs. Holloway already moving around the kitchen. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Tom standing in the doorway, water dripping from his hat. "Storm's coming," he said without preamble. "Big one, looks like. I've secured everything outside, but you ladies should stay inside once it hits. Could get rough." "Thank you, Tom," Mrs. Holloway said. "Have you heard anything from town?" Tom shook his head. "Nothing yet, but the storm might slow communication. Don't mean anything's wrong, just that news might be delayed." Evelyn felt her anxiety ratchet higher. Another day without word, another day of not knowing. She moved to the window and watched the clouds rolling in, dark and heavy and full of fury. The storm hit around midday with startling violence. Rain lashed the windows, wind howled around the eaves, and lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. Evelyn and Mrs. Holloway retreated to the parlor, the older woman continuing her endless knitting while Evelyn tried to read but mostly just stared at the pages without comprehension. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of abating. And then, just as afternoon was sliding into early evening, Evelyn heard something beneath the thunder, the sound of horses, multiple riders approaching fast. She was on her feet and at the window before Mrs. Holloway could stop her, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see them, 6 riders, muddy and exhausted but upright, riding hard toward the barn. "It's them," Evelyn breathed. "They're back." Mrs. Holloway joined her at the window, squinting through the rain. "Thank the Lord, Tom's going out to meet them." Evelyn watched as Tom emerged from the barn and helped the riders dismount, gesturing them inside out of the rain. She couldn't make out details through the storm, couldn't tell if anyone was injured, couldn't see Luke clearly enough to know if he was all right. The not knowing was torture. "Should we—" she started. "Give them a moment," Mrs. Holloway said firmly. "Let them get inside, get warm. They'll come to the house when they're ready." But Evelyn couldn't wait. She was already moving toward the door, ignoring Mrs. Holloway's protest, pulling a shawl over her head and stepping out into the storm. The rain hit her like a physical force, cold and brutal, but she didn't care. She ran toward the barn, her feet sliding in the mud, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the exertion. She reached the barn just as the men were filing inside. They looked like they'd been through hell, clothes torn, faces haggard, mud caked on boots and hands. But they were alive, all of them, and when Luke turned and saw her standing in the doorway, soaked and breathless and probably looking half mad, his expression shifted into something Evelyn couldn't quite read. "Evelyn." He crossed the barn in 4 long strides. "What are you doing out here? You should be inside." "I had to know," she said, words tumbling over each other. "I had to see. Are you all right? Is everyone—" "We're fine." Luke's hands came up to grip her shoulders, steadying her. We caught them. It's over. Evelyn stared at him, trying to process the words. Over? The bandits. We tracked them to a canyon about 30 miles north. They tried to make a stand, but we had them surrounded. 3 surrendered without a fight. The other 2 tried to run and... He paused. They didn't make it, but no one on our side was seriously hurt, just some scrapes and bruises. You caught them, Evelyn repeated, still not quite believing. You actually caught them. We did. Luke's thumbs pressed gently against her shoulders, his voice dropping lower. And we recovered most of what they'd stolen, including some trunks and luggage from your coach. Tom's going through it now to see what belongs to who. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, relief so intense it was almost painful. My trunk. Did you find my trunk? Don't know yet, but if it's there, we'll get it back to you. Luke studied her face, concern replacing the exhaustion in his eyes. You're shaking. Come on, let's get you inside before you catch cold. He tried to turn her toward the house, but Evelyn resisted, her hands coming up to grip his arms. I was so scared, she said, the words breaking free before she could stop them. The whole time you were gone, I kept thinking... She couldn't finish, couldn't name the terrible possibilities that had haunted her. Luke's expression softened. I know, but I told you I'd come back. People make promises they can't keep all the time. Not me. Luke's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. When I give my word, Evelyn, I mean it. You can count on that. Evelyn looked up at him, this man who'd become so important to her in such a short time, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. The belief that maybe not everyone would let her down, that maybe some people actually did what they said they would. I'm glad you're back, she whispered. Luke's hands tightened briefly on her shoulders, then released. Come on, let's get you warm and dry. We can talk more once everyone's settled. They walked back to the house together through the pouring rain, and this time Evelyn didn't feel quite so alone. The storm could rage all it wanted. The bandits had been caught. Luke had come back. And for the first time since the attack, Evelyn felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. Inside the house, Mrs. Holloway had already sprung into action, heating water for baths and laying out dry clothes. The other men from the posse had dispersed to their own homes, but Luke stayed peeling off his soaked coat while Evelyn stood dripping on the floor, still trying to absorb the fact that he was really here, really safe. You're both going to catch your deaths, Mrs. Holloway scolded, though her eyes were bright with relief. Evelyn, go change immediately. Luke, there's hot water in the basin and clean clothes in the spare room. Don't argue with me, either of you. Evelyn obeyed without protest, retreating to her room and stripping out of the wet dress with trembling fingers. The cold had settled deep into her bones, or maybe it was just the aftermath of 3 days of constant fear finally releasing its grip. She dried herself roughly with a towel and pulled on a fresh dress, then wrapped herself in the quilt from the bed and returned to the parlor. Luke was already there, his hair still damp but wearing dry clothes, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression eased when he saw her bundled in the quilt. Better? He asked. Yes. Evelyn settled into the chair across from him, tucking the quilt more tightly around herself. Tell me what happened. All of it. Luke took a slow sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. We picked up their trail the first day, heading northwest like we expected. They were moving fast but not careful, left signs everywhere. Broken branches, tracks, abandoned campsites. They thought they'd gotten away clean, didn't bother covering their trail. Arrogant, Mrs. Holloway murmured from her spot by the fire. Stupid, more like, Luke said. We closed the distance steadily, and by the second night we were maybe 4 hours behind them. That's when the storm started building. We had to make camp, wait it out, but we knew they'd have to do the same. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, drawn into the story despite herself. And then? This morning, just after dawn, we found their camp. They'd holed up in a canyon with only one way in or out. Probably thought it was defensible, but it just trapped them. Sheriff called out for them to surrender, told them they were surrounded. 3 of them put their hands up right away. Young kids, really, barely 20, scared out of their minds. And the other 2?
Evelyn's voice was quiet. Luke's jaw tightened. The leaders, older men, harder. They tried to shoot their way out. Didn't get far. Sheriff's deputy took a bullet to the arm, but he'll be fine. The two who ran, he paused, choosing his words carefully. They didn't make it past the canyon mouth. Evelyn absorbed this, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions she couldn't quite name, relief that they'd been stopped, satisfaction that they'd faced justice. And underneath it all, a dark sort of vindication that the men who'd hurt her wouldn't hurt anyone else ever again. What happens to the three who surrendered? She asked. They'll stand trial. Grand larceny, assault with intent, probably attempted murder given what they did to you and the others. They'll hang or spend the rest of their lives in prison. Luke set his coffee cup down. But the important thing is they're caught. It's finished. And my trunk? Evelyn hated how much hope threaded through the question, how desperately she wanted to recover that one piece of her old life. Luke's expression shifted into something almost like a smile. Tom found it. Your name was on the tag. Evelyn Cross, Sacramento. It's in the barn right now, muddy but intact. We'll bring it in once it dries out a bit. Evelyn's breath caught. Everything's still inside? Haven't opened it to check, but it's locked and the lock wasn't forced. Looks like they grabbed it but never got around to going through it before we caught up to them. Luke leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You'll have your things back, Evelyn. Your letters, your clothes, whatever you packed. All of it. The relief that washed over her was so intense it felt almost like pain. Those belongings represented more than just practical necessities. They were connections to her parents, memories of her life before, proof that she'd existed as someone other than the broken woman who'd collapsed in the street. Getting them back felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd thought was lost forever. Thank you, she whispered, for going after them, for getting it back. You don't have to thank me for doing what's right, Luke said, but his voice was gentle. I'm just glad we caught them before anyone else got hurt. Mrs. Holloway rose from her chair, smoothing her skirts. Well, now that you're both back and safe, I'm going to start supper. Luke, you look half-starved. And Evelyn, you need to eat properly. You've barely touched food for 3 days. She bustled off toward the kitchen, leaving Luke and Evelyn alone in the parlor. The fire crackled softly, rain still drumming against the windows, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was charged with something unspoken, some shift in the dynamic between them that neither quite knew how to address. Finally, Evelyn broke it. I realized something while you were gone. Luke looked at her, waiting. I realized that I've been so focused on surviving, on just getting through each moment without falling apart, that I haven't let myself think about what comes next, about what I actually want. She pulled the quilt tighter, as if it could protect her from her own vulnerability. But these past 3 days, waiting for you to come back, wondering if you'd be safe, it made me realize I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to actually live. I want to make choices, not just have things happen to me. Luke studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. What kind of choices? He asked quietly. I don't know yet, Evelyn admitted. But I know I can't go to Sacramento. Not now. Maybe not ever. That was my aunt's solution to my problems, not mine. And I think... She hesitated, then pushed forward. I think I need to find my own solution, my own path. Does that path include staying here? The question was careful, neutral, but Evelyn heard the weight beneath it. I don't know, she said honestly. I know I'm grateful to you. I know I feel safer here than I have anywhere else. But I also know that gratitude and safety aren't the same as belonging, and I need to figure out where I actually belong before I can make any real decisions. Luke nodded slowly, and if he was disappointed by her answer, he didn't show it. That's fair. You've been through hell, Evelyn. You're allowed to take time to figure things out. But I can't stay here indefinitely, Evelyn continued, needing to be clear. Mrs. Holloway has her own life to get back to, and you've already done more than anyone could expect. I can't keep imposing on your kindness. You're not imposing, Luke said firmly, but I understand what you're saying. So here's what I propose. You stay here while you heal, properly heal, and while you figure out what you want. A month? 2 months? However long it takes. Mrs. Holloway's agreed to stay as long as you need her. And when you're ready to make a decision about your future, we'll support whatever you choose. Whether that's staying in Red Hollow, going to your aunt, or something else entirely. Evelyn stared at him. Why would you do that? You barely know me. Because you deserve the chance to make your own choices, Luke said simply. You've had enough people making decisions for you, pushing you into corners. I'm not going to be one of them. Something in Evelyn's chest loosened at those words, some knot of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Luke wasn't trying to control her or obligate her. He was offering her space and time and the freedom to choose. It was more than anyone had offered her in years. All right, she said softly. Thank you for understanding, for not pushing. You'll get there, Luke said. Just give yourself time. They were interrupted by Mrs. Holloway calling them to supper. Venison stew with vegetables, thick slices of bread, strong coffee. Tom joined them, having finished securing the barn for the night, and the conversation turned to practical matters. The storm was supposed to last through tomorrow, Tom reported. The cattle were secure in the lower pasture, the horses comfortable in the barn. Everything was as it should be. After supper, Luke excused himself to check on something in the barn, and Mrs. Holloway settled by the fire with her knitting. Evelyn sat nearby, ostensibly reading, but mostly just watching the flames dance and listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. Her mind kept circling back to the trunk waiting in the barn, to the pieces of her past contained within it. When Luke returned an hour later, he was carrying the trunk, dried off and cleaned of mud. He set it down carefully in front of Evelyn's chair, water dripping from his coat sleeves. Thought you might want this tonight, he said. Key's probably in your reticule, if you still have it. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for the small beaded bag she'd been clutching when she collapsed. The key was still there, tucked into the inner pocket. She fitted into the lock, turned it, and heard the satisfying click. Then she lifted the lid. Everything was there. Her mother's shawl, carefully folded. The letters her father had written during his time away at war, tied with a ribbon. Her best dress, the one she'd planned to wear when meeting her aunt. A photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Books, journals, small treasures that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to her. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of emotion. It was all still here. The bandits had taken so much from her, her sense of safety, her confidence, her trust in the world. But they hadn't taken this. Her memories were still intact. Mrs. Holloway was beside her in an instant, one arm around her shoulders. There now, dear, let it out. And Evelyn did. She cried for the first time since the attack, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, releasing days of pent-up fear and grief and relief all at once. Mrs. Holloway held her through it, murmuring soft comfort, while Luke stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral, but his hands clenched at his sides, as if it took physical effort not to do something, fix something, make it better somehow. When the tears finally subsided, Evelyn felt hollow, but somehow lighter. She wiped her eyes with the handkerchief Mrs. Holloway pressed into her hand and looked up at Luke. Thank you, she said, her voice rough, for bringing this back, for everything. Luke just nodded, but something in his eyes told her he understood exactly what she meant. The next week passed in a strange sort of limbo. The storm cleared, leaving everything washed clean and bright. Evelyn's physical injuries continued to heal, the bruises fading to yellow-green, the cuts scabbing over, her ribs hurting less with each passing day. But the emotional healing was slower, more complicated. She had nightmares most nights, waking in a cold sweat with her heart hammering, convinced for those first disoriented moments that the bandits were still there, that she was still trapped in that coach. Mrs. Holloway would hear her and come sit with her until she calmed, sometimes bringing tea, sometimes just offering quiet presence. Luke never came to her room, propriety forbade it, but she often saw lamplight under his door at odd hours and suspected he slept as poorly as she did. During the days, Evelyn slowly began to reclaim pieces of herself. She started taking short walks around the ranch, at first just to the barn and back, then gradually farther. The physical activity helped, gave her something to focus on besides the endless loop of memories and fears. Luke or Tom always accompanied her, never hovering but always present, and gradually she began to trust that she was actually safe. She also began to help more around the house, insisting despite Mrs. Holloway's protests. Cooking, cleaning, mending, simple tasks that gave her a sense of purpose and control. Mrs. Holloway accepted the help with good grace, and the two women fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side while talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of these conversations that Mrs. Holloway brought up what everyone had been carefully avoiding. "The town's going to want to see you eventually," she said, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "People are curious, and there will be talk about you staying here, even with me as chaperone." Evelyn's hand stilled in the bowl of peas she was shelling. "What kind of talk?" "The usual kind." Mrs. Holloway's tone was matter-of-fact. "That you and Luke are courting, that he's planning to marry you, that you're taking advantage of his kindness, that he's compromising your reputation." She punched the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. People love to gossip, especially about things they don't understand. "Should I go to town?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Show them I'm... what? Respectable? Grateful? Not some fallen woman taking advantage?" "You should go to town when you're ready," Mrs. Holloway said firmly. "Not because of what people think, but because you need to face it eventually. Red Hollow is a small place. You can't hide on this ranch forever." "I'm not hiding." "Aren't you?" Mrs. Holloway's gaze was kind but direct. "I'm not criticizing, dear. You've been through something terrible, and you're healing. But part of healing is learning to be out in the world again, even when the world can be unkind." Evelyn knew she was right. She'd been using the ranch as a sanctuary, a place apart from judgment and questions and the hard work of rebuilding her life. But sanctuary couldn't last forever. Eventually, she'd have to step back into the world and face whatever waited there. "What if I'm not strong enough?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "Then you'll find strength you didn't know you had," Mrs. Holloway said simply, "just like you have been every day since you got here." That evening, Evelyn brought it up with Luke. They were on the porch after supper, watching the sun set in streaks of orange and gold. Luke was working on repairing a bridle, his hands moving with the unconscious skill of long practice. "Mrs. Holloway thinks I should go to town," Evelyn said without preamble. Luke's hands paused briefly, then resumed their work. "What do you think?" "I think she's right. I think I've been avoiding it because I'm afraid of what people will say, what they'll think about me, about us." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But I also think that fear is just giving them power over me, and I'm tired of giving people power over me." Luke set down the bridle and looked at her directly. "Then we'll go to town. Tomorrow, if you want. Or next week. Whenever you're ready. Would you come with me? If you want me to." "I do." Evelyn met his gaze. "I know that'll probably make the gossip worse, but I don't want to face it alone." "You won't be alone," Luke said quietly. "Not if I have anything to say about it." They went to town 2 days later, on a bright Saturday morning when the streets would be busy with weekend shoppers. Luke drove the wagon with Evelyn beside him and Mrs. Holloway in the back, the older woman having insisted on coming for moral support. As they approached Red Hollow, Evelyn felt her anxiety rise with each turn of the wheels. "You all right?" Luke asked, glancing at her. "No," Evelyn admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Luke's lips quirked in something almost like a smile. "That's courage, you know. Doing the hard thing even when you're scared. Feels more like stupidity." "It's not." Luke's voice was firm. "Trust me on that." They pulled up outside the general store, and immediately Evelyn felt the weight of attention shift toward them. Conversations paused. Heads turned, eyes tracked their movements as Luke helped first Mrs. Holloway and then Evelyn down from the wagon. The scrutiny felt like a physical thing, pressing against her skin. "Steady," Luke murmured, offering his arm. "Just breathe." Evelyn took his arm, grateful for the solid presence beside her, and together they walked into the store. Martha Green was behind the counter, and her eyebrows rose when she saw them. "Luke? Miss Cross." Her tone was neutral, carefully giving nothing away. "What can I do for you?" "Miss Cross needs some supplies," Luke said evenly. "Fabric for a new dress, thread, needles, whatever she requires." Martha's gaze shifted to Evelyn. You're looking better than the last time you were here. I'm healing, Evelyn said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Thank you for the clothes you sent. They've been very helpful. You're welcome. Martha gestured toward the fabric bolts lining one wall. Help yourself to whatever you need. Let me know if you have questions. As Evelyn moved toward the fabric, she was acutely aware of the other customers in the store. 2 women examining dry goods, an older man sorting through nails, a young couple near the door. They were all trying not to stare, but she could feel their curiosity like heat from a fire. She was examining a bolt of deep blue cotton when one of the women approached. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You're the woman from the Stagecoach, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Evelyn kept her chin up, meeting the woman's gaze. I am. I'm Judith Marsh. My husband's the banker. The woman looked her up and down, evaluating. We heard you're staying at Luke Carver's ranch. I am, with Mrs. Holloway as chaperone. Evelyn made sure to emphasize that last part. And how long do you plan to stay? The question had teeth, and Evelyn felt them. As long as I need to recover from my injuries. I see. Judith's expression gave nothing away. Well, welcome to Red Hollow, Miss Cross. I hope your stay is pleasant. She walked away, leaving Evelyn feeling like she'd just undergone some sort of test. Whether she'd passed or failed, she couldn't tell. Luke appeared at her elbow, his expression concerned. You all right? Fine, Evelyn said, though her hands were shaking slightly. She was just curious. Judith Marsh is always curious, Luke said dryly. She's the town's unofficial keeper of social standards. If she approves of you, everyone else will fall in line. And if she doesn't, then we'll deal with it. Luke's tone left no room for argument. But you handled that well, held your ground without being defensive. That's exactly right. They finished their shopping. Evelyn chose the blue fabric along with thread and a few other necessities, and Luke paid for everything before she could protest. As they were leaving, Dr. Brennan came in, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Evelyn. Miss Cross, good to see you up and about. How are you feeling? Much better, Doctor. Thank you. And the nightmares? The anxiety? His voice dropped, professional and kind. Still there, Evelyn admitted, but less intense, more manageable. That's good. That's progress. Brennan looked at Luke. You're taking good care of her, I see. Mrs. Holloway's doing most of the work, Luke said, deflecting the compliment. I'm sure. Brennan's eyes held a knowing gleam, but he didn't press. Well, keep doing what you're doing. And Miss Cross, if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to send for me. I won't. Thank you, Doctor. They made one more stop at the post office, where Luke checked for mail, and Evelyn wrote a brief letter to her aunt explaining that she'd been delayed but was safe. She didn't go into details about the attack or her current situation that could wait for a longer letter, or perhaps never. Some things were too complicated to explain in writing. As they walked back to the wagon, Evelyn realized something had shifted inside her. The anxiety was still there, but underneath it was something new, a fragile sense of accomplishment. She'd come to town. She'd faced the stares and questions. She hadn't fallen apart or hidden or run away. She'd stood her ground. You did good today, Mrs. Holloway said as they drove out of town. Real good. It wasn't so terrible, Evelyn admitted. I mean, it wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't the disaster I'd built up in my head either. That's usually how it goes, Luke said. The anticipation is worse than the reality. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Do we just wait and see how people react? We live our lives, Luke said simply. We work, we eat, we sleep. We treat people with respect and expect the same in return. And if someone has a problem with how we're handling things, they can take it up with me directly. Evelyn looked at him, this steady, quiet man who'd become her unexpected champion, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, though that was part of it. Something deeper. Something that felt dangerously like the beginning of trust becoming something more, but she pushed that thought away. It was too soon, too complicated. She needed to focus on healing, on finding her own strength, before she could even think about anything else. Still, as they rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, Evelyn allowed herself to acknowledge one simple truth. She was glad she was here, glad she'd landed in Luke Carver's world, however accidentally, and glad that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had people who stood with her instead of judging from a distance. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. That trip to town marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, Evelyn found herself venturing out more often, sometimes with Luke, sometimes with Mrs. Holloway, and eventually, though it took considerable courage, alone. Each time was easier than the last. The stairs became less pointed, the whispers less frequent. People began to greet her by name instead of as that woman from the Stagecoach. She was becoming a person again rather than a story, and the difference mattered more than she'd expected. Her body continued to heal. The bruises faded completely, the cuts became pale scars, and her ribs stopped protesting every deep breath. But it was the internal healing that surprised her most. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they came less frequently, and when they did, she was better at pulling herself back from them. The constant low-grade anxiety that had hummed beneath everything began to quiet, replaced by something steadier. She started working on the ranch in earnest, not just helping Mrs. Holloway with household tasks, but venturing outside to assist with real work. Tom taught her how to feed the horses properly, how to muck stalls without straining her back, how to mend fence posts. Luke showed her the account books one evening, explaining the economics of running a ranch, what sold and for how much, what expenses were necessary and which could be delayed, how to balance income against outflow. "Why are you showing me this?" Evelyn asked, studying the neat columns of numbers. Luke looked up from the ledger. "Because you asked, and because you should understand how things work if you're going to make informed decisions about your future." "You think I might stay?" It wasn't a question. "I think you might, or you might not. Either way, understanding ranch economics is useful knowledge." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I want you to know exactly what staying would mean. Not just the pleasant parts, but the hard work, the tight margins, the uncertainty of depending on weather and market prices." Evelyn studied his face, trying to read what lay beneath the practical words. "You're not trying to scare me off?" "No, I'm trying to make sure you have all the information." Luke's gaze was steady, honest. "If you choose to stay, I want it to be because you know what you're choosing, not because you feel obligated or because you don't think you have other options." "I could still go to my aunt," Evelyn said, testing the words. They felt strange in her mouth now, like a language she'd once spoken but was forgetting. "You could. Or you could go somewhere entirely different. Start fresh in a place where nobody knows what happened." Luke closed the ledger carefully. "You have choices, Evelyn. Don't forget that." But the truth was, Evelyn was beginning to realize that Red Hollow didn't feel like a temporary stop anymore. It felt like something else, something she didn't quite have words for yet. The ranch had become familiar. She knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway, which horse nickered for treats when she passed the barn, how the light fell through the kitchen window in the afternoon. More than that, the people had become familiar. Mrs. Holloway's gentle wisdom, Tom's quiet competence, and Luke. Luke had become something she couldn't quite define, but knew she didn't want to lose. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the attack, Evelyn was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from the vegetable patch Mrs. Holloway had planted. The work was meditative, rhythmic, and the sun was warm on her back. She'd rolled up her sleeves and tied her hair back with a ribbon, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt almost content. "Looks good," Luke's voice came from behind her. Evelyn sat back on her heels, shading her eyes to look up at him. "Mrs. Holloway did most of the real work. I'm just maintaining it." "Still counts." Luke crouched down beside her, examining the neat rows of carrots and beans. "You've got a knack for this." "My mother had a garden. I helped her when I was young." The memory didn't hurt quite as sharply as it once had. She said working with living things kept you connected to what mattered. Smart woman. She was. Evelyn pulled another weed, adding it to the pile beside her. "Luke, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why didn't you ever marry? You're what, 35, 40? You've got a successful ranch, you're respected in town. Seems like you would have had opportunities." Luke was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. 37, and I suppose I never found someone who fit. Ranch life isn't easy, and it's not for everyone. I needed someone who could be a true partner, not just someone who'd keep house and look pretty at church socials. He glanced at her. And I guess I was never willing to settle for less than that, even if it meant being alone. Are you lonely? The question was too personal, but Evelyn found she wanted to know. Sometimes, Luke admitted, but I'd rather be lonely than trapped in a marriage with the wrong person. I've seen what that does to people, how it drains the life out of them slowly, year after year. Evelyn thought about that, about the courage it took to choose loneliness over the wrong companionship. I think I understand that. They worked in silence for a while, Luke helping her weed despite having a dozen other tasks waiting for him. The sun moved across the sky, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark sang. It was peaceful in a way Evelyn had almost forgotten existed, not the absence of trouble, but the presence of something good. Finally, Luke stood, brushing dirt from his knees. There's something I need to talk to you about. Evelyn's stomach tightened at his tone. What is it? Mrs. Holloway needs to go back to her own home. Her daughter's had a baby, and she wants to be there to help. She stayed longer than she originally planned because of you. Oh. Evelyn felt a pang of loss mixed with guilt. Of course she should go. When? End of the week, most likely. Luke offered his hand to help her up, and she took it, his palm warm and calloused against hers. Which means we need to figure out what happens next. Evelyn understood what he wasn't saying. Without Mrs. Holloway as chaperone, her staying at the ranch became impossible. The town might have accepted the arrangement with the older woman present, but without her, the gossip would become vicious. Evelyn's reputation, already fragile, would be destroyed completely. I could move into town, she said slowly. Find a room at the boarding house. Maybe look for work. You could, Luke agreed. Is that what you want? Evelyn looked around at the ranch, the garden she'd helped tend, the house where she'd slowly learned to feel safe again, the wide Montana sky stretching endless and free in every direction. No, she said quietly. No, it's not. Then there's another option. Luke's voice was careful, neutral. We could make it official. Get married. It would solve the propriety problem, and it would give you legal protection. A real place here if you want it. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd known this conversation was coming, had felt it building for weeks, but hearing the words still shocked her. You're proposing? I'm offering a solution, Luke corrected, but not unkindly. I'm not talking about love or romance, Evelyn. I'm talking about a practical partnership. You'd have a home, security, a place you belong. I'd have... He paused, searching for words. Someone who understands the work. Someone who's proven they can handle difficulty without falling apart. A true partner in running this place. That's very practical, Evelyn said, and she couldn't quite keep the hurt from her voice. She shouldn't feel hurt. This was exactly the kind of honest, straightforward proposal that made sense given their circumstances. But some foolish part of her had hoped for something more. Luke caught the tone. I'm saying this wrong. He turned to face her fully, and his expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. The truth is, I care about you, Evelyn. More than I expected to, more than I probably should given how little time we've actually known each other. I think about you when I'm working. I worry about you when you're upset. I want to see you happy and safe and thriving here. But you don't love me, Evelyn said, and it wasn't quite a question. I don't know what I feel, Luke admitted. What I know is that you deserve honesty. I won't lie and say I'm madly in love with you when what I actually feel is respect and caring and the beginning of something that might become love, given time. But I also won't treat this as just a business arrangement, because it's more than that. You're more than that. Evelyn felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back. What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm too damaged, too broken? You're not broken, Luke said firmly. You're healing. There's a difference. And I'm patient enough to let you finish healing at your own pace. He reached out and took her hand again, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I'm asking you to build something with me, Evelyn. Not to fix me, not to save me, but to be my partner, my equal. Someone who stands with me instead of behind me. That's what you want? A partner? That's what I want. What I've always wanted. Luke's voice dropped lower. And I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think that you want the same thing. Not to be rescued or protected, but to be valued. To be given the chance to prove what you're capable of." He was right. That was exactly what she wanted, what she'd been wanting without quite realizing it. Not safety as a gift from someone stronger, but the opportunity to build her own strength. Not rescue, but partnership. "I need time to think," Evelyn said finally. It's a lot." "Take all the time you need," Luke said. "Mrs. Holloway leaves Saturday. You have until Friday to decide. And whatever you choose, I'll support it. If you want to go to town, I'll help you find a good room. If you want to leave Red Hollow entirely, I'll make sure you have the means to travel safely. And if you want to stay—" He didn't finish the sentence, just squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. That night, Evelyn lay awake long after Mrs. Holloway's gentle snoring had filled the quiet house. Her mind turned over Luke's proposal from every angle, examining it for flaws, for hidden costs, for the catch she was sure must exist somewhere. But she couldn't find one. He'd been honest about what he was offering and what he expected in return. No false promises, no romantic illusions, just a straightforward partnership between two people who respected each other. The question was whether she could accept that. Whether she could commit to building a life here with a man she didn't love. Not yet, maybe not ever, based on mutual respect and practical compatibility rather than passion. She thought about her aunt in Sacramento waiting for a niece who'd never arrived. She thought about the life she'd left behind in St. Louis, cramped rooms, scarce work, the slow erosion of hope. And she thought about the life she'd begun building here. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon rides to check fence lines, evening conversations about everything and nothing. The quiet satisfaction of work well done, the peace of open spaces, the steady presence of people who'd proven they wouldn't abandon her when things got difficult. By the time dawn broke, Evelyn had made her decision. She found Luke in the barn after breakfast, checking a mare who'd been favoring her left foreleg. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression told her he'd been waiting for this moment. "I have an answer," Evelyn said without preamble. Luke straightened, setting down the mare's hoof carefully. "All right. I want to stay. I want to accept your proposal." The words came easier than she'd expected. "But I need you to understand something first." "What's that?" "I can't promise I'll ever love you the way wives are supposed to love husbands. I can promise respect, loyalty, partnership, honesty. I can promise to work hard and pull my weight and be someone you can count on. But love?" She shook her head. "I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. The attack, everything that came before it, I think it broke something in me that might not heal." Luke moved closer, and his expression was impossibly gentle. "Evelyn, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to build a life with me. If love happens, that's a gift. If it doesn't, we'll still have something worth having, respect, trust, partnership. That's more than most married couples get." "You're sure about this?" Evelyn searched his face. "You're not going to wake up in 6 months or a year and regret tying yourself to damaged goods." "Don't call yourself that." Luke's voice hardened slightly. "You're not damaged goods. You're a woman who survived something terrible and came out stronger. That's not weakness, Evelyn. That's strength I don't think you even recognize yet." Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, some last wall of defense crumbling. "All right," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Luke smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Good. That's good." He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "We should probably tell Mrs. Holloway and figure out when we want to do this. The wedding, I mean." "Soon," Evelyn said, "before I can talk myself out of it, before the town has time to build up expectations or spread rumors about why we're rushing." She managed a shaky laugh. "Is that too fast?" "No," Luke said firmly. "It's practical. We'll talk to the Reverend today, see when he can do it. Simple ceremony, just what's necessary to make it legal and proper." They walked back to the house together, and when Luke opened the door for her, Evelyn caught Mrs. Holloway watching them through the kitchen window. The older woman's face broke into a knowing smile, and when they entered, she was already pulling out flour and sugar. "Well," she said, "I suppose I'll be staying through Saturday after all. Can't have a wedding without a proper cake."
How did you? Evelyn started. Dear girl, I've been waiting for this since the day Luke carried you into Dr. Brennan's office. About time you both figured it out. Mrs. Holloway began measuring ingredients with practiced efficiency. Now, when's the ceremony? We haven't, Luke began. Saturday morning, Mrs. Holloway interrupted. Gives us 3 days to prepare. Not much time, but we'll manage. Evelyn, that blue fabric you bought needs to be made into a proper dress. We'll work on that today. Luke, you'll need to ride to town and talk to Reverend Michaels, get everything arranged, and someone needs to spread the word. Can't have a wedding without witnesses. Evelyn and Luke exchanged glances, both slightly overwhelmed by Mrs. Holloway's sudden take-charge attitude. She's right, Luke said finally. Saturday works. I'll go to town now, handle the arrangements. After he left, Mrs. Holloway turned to Evelyn with an expression that was equal parts stern and tender. Are you sure about this, dear? I know Luke's a good man, but marriage is permanent. You need to be certain. I'm certain, Evelyn said, and was surprised to find it was true. Not because I have to be, but because I want to be. That's different, isn't it? It is, Mrs. Holloway agreed. It's all the difference. She pulled Evelyn into a quick, fierce hug. You're going to be happy here. I can feel it. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The blue fabric became a simple but elegant dress, fitted properly with Mrs. Holloway's expert help. Luke cleaned the house from top to bottom. Tom repaired the front steps that had been listing slightly, and someone, Evelyn suspected Mrs. Holloway, spread word through town that Luke Carver was getting married. The responses varied. Dr. Brennan stopped by to offer his congratulations and a knowing smile. Martha Green sent over a set of fine linens as a wedding gift. A few of the ranch hands who'd worked for Luke over the years showed up to shake his hand and welcome Evelyn properly. Even Judith Marsh, the banker's wife who'd interrogated Evelyn in the general store, sent a brief note saying she looked forward to seeing them both at church. But not everyone approved. There were whispers about the speed of the courtship, questions about whether Evelyn was taking advantage of Luke's kindness, speculation about whether she might be pregnant and needing to cover it up. Luke heard the gossip and came home tight-jawed and angry, but Evelyn just shrugged. Let them talk, she said. We know the truth. That's what matters. Doesn't it bother you? Luke asked. What they're saying? Of course it bothers me, but I've learned something these past few months. Evelyn looked at him steadily. People are going to judge no matter what I do. I can spend my life trying to meet their expectations and still fall short. Or I can live according to my own standards and let them think what they will. I choose the latter. Luke studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. When did you get so wise? When I stopped caring more about what people thought than about what was actually true. Evelyn managed a small smile. Turns out, nearly dying puts things in perspective. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that felt like a gift. Evelyn woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves but her mind calm. Mrs. Holloway helped her dress, fussing over every detail until the blue dress hung just right and Evelyn's hair was pinned up properly with small white flowers Tom had found somewhere. You look beautiful, Mrs. Holloway said, her eyes suspiciously bright. Luke's a lucky man. I think we're both lucky, Evelyn said, or maybe just smart enough to recognize a good opportunity. The ceremony was held at the small church in Red Hollow, with Reverend Michaels officiating. The pews were perhaps a third full, better than Evelyn had feared, but far from the crowded wedding she might have had under different circumstances. Tom stood as Luke's witness, Mrs. Holloway as Evelyn's. Dr. Brennan attended, along with Martha Green and her husband, and a scattering of ranch hands and townspeople curious enough to come despite the gossip. Luke stood at the altar in a clean suit, his hair neatly combed and his expression serious but not unhappy. When Evelyn walked down the aisle, alone, with no father to give her away, his eyes found hers and held them, steady and sure. The vows were traditional, the ceremony brief. Reverend Michaels spoke about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of mutual respect and commitment, the blessing of partnership. Evelyn spoke her responses clearly, not stumbling over the words. And when Luke slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt the weight of it settle like an anchor. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Michaels said. Luke, you may kiss your bride. Luke leaned in carefully, and their lips met in a chaste, respectful kiss
that nevertheless sent warmth spreading through Evelyn's chest. Not passion, not yet, but something gentler and perhaps more durable. The beginning of real partnership sealed with a promise. The small reception afterward was held at the ranch. Mrs. Holloway had outdone herself with the cake and refreshments, and the guests who'd attended the ceremony stayed for a while, offering congratulations and well wishes before gradually dispersing. By late afternoon, it was just the four of them again: Luke, Evelyn, Mrs. Holloway, and Tom. "Well," Mrs. Holloway said, surveying the cleaned-up parlor with satisfaction, "that's that then. You're properly married, and I can leave with a clear conscience." "You're leaving tomorrow?" Evelyn felt a pang of loss. Mrs. Holloway had become more than a chaperone. She'd been a guide, a friend, a steady presence through the hardest weeks of Evelyn's life. "Tomorrow morning," Mrs. Holloway confirmed, "my daughter needs me, and you two need time to figure out this marriage without an old woman hovering over you." She hugged Evelyn tightly. "But I'm only a day's ride away. If you need anything at all, you send for me." "I will," Evelyn promised. "Thank you for everything." "No thanks necessary." Mrs. Holloway pulled back, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "Just be happy. That's all the thanks I need." After Mrs. Holloway and Tom had both retired for the evening, Evelyn and Luke found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. The weight of that reality settled over them, awkward and uncertain. "I prepared the guest room for you," Luke said finally. "I know we're married now, but I don't expect— that is, I want you to be comfortable. We can take things slow." Evelyn felt a rush of gratitude for his understanding, for his willingness to let her set the pace. "Thank you. I think that's wise. This is still so new." "It is," Luke agreed. "But we have time. All the time we need." He moved to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "I want you to know something, Evelyn. Today wasn't about obligation or convenience for me. I married you because I wanted to, because I think we can build something good together." "I think so too," Evelyn said softly. She crossed to stand beside him, and after a moment's hesitation, she took his hand. He laced his fingers through hers, and they stood there together, looking out at the ranch that was now truly their shared home. "We're going to be all right," Luke said quietly. "Aren't we?" "Yes," Evelyn said, and she believed it. "We are." They stood there for a long time, holding hands in the gathering darkness. Two people who'd found each other through accident and necessity, now choosing to face the future together. It wasn't the romantic story people might have expected, but it was real and honest and built on a foundation of mutual respect that felt more solid than any amount of passion could provide. Evelyn Cross was now Evelyn Carver, and for the first time since losing her parents, she felt like she'd found a place where she truly belonged. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd chosen it. And that choice, made freely and with full knowledge of what she was accepting, felt like the first truly powerful decision she'd made in years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, learning to live together, to work together, to build a partnership that balanced both their needs. But tonight, standing in the home that was now hers by right rather than charity, with a man who'd proven his steadiness and honor, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt hope. The first weeks of marriage were an exercise in careful negotiation. Evelyn and Luke moved around each other with the cautious politeness of strangers sharing a stage, each trying to anticipate the other's needs without quite knowing how. They took their meals together, worked side by side during the day, and retreated to separate rooms each night. It was cordial, respectful, and utterly exhausting in its restraint. Evelyn threw herself into learning the full scope of ranch management. Luke had been honest about wanting a true partner, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of that trust. She spent mornings in the office going over accounts, learning to track expenses and income with the same precision Luke used. Afternoons found her outside, working alongside Tom and the occasional hired hand, mending fences, checking cattle, learning to read the land and weather the way Luke did instinctively. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Luke said one evening, finding her hunched over the ledger long after supper, lamplight casting shadows across her tired face. "I'm fine," Evelyn insisted, not looking up from the columns of numbers. "You're exhausted." Luke closed the ledger gently but firmly. "This isn't a test, Evelyn.
You don't have to prove anything.
Don't I? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Everyone in town is watching, waiting to see if I'm really up to this or if I'm just another burden you've taken on out of misplaced charity. Luke pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. Is that what you think? That you're a burden? Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. I think I'm a woman who showed up here with nothing, who married you 6 weeks later, and who's now trying desperately not to make you regret that decision. Look at me, Luke said quietly, and she did, reluctantly. His expression was serious but not angry. I don't regret marrying you, not for a single moment. But I didn't marry you so you could work yourself into the ground trying to earn your place. You already have a place here. You're my wife. That's not conditional on how many fence posts you mend or how perfectly you balance the books. Then what is it conditional on? Evelyn asked, her voice small. Nothing. That's the point. Luke reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused. You're here because I want you here. Because I value who you are, not just what you can do. Yes? I appreciate your help with the ranch. You've got a good head for numbers and you learn fast. But even if you couldn't do any of that, you'd still belong here. Evelyn felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back. I don't know how to just be, without proving myself, without earning my keep. Then maybe we both need to learn, Luke said, because I'm not much better at it. I've spent so long running this place alone that I forget I don't have to anymore, that I can ask for help, share the load, let someone else make decisions. He paused. We're both trying too hard to be perfect partners instead of just being human with each other. So what do? Evelyn asked. We start being more honest. Stop trying to anticipate what the other person needs and just ask. Stop pretending everything's fine when it's not. Luke's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Tell me something true right now. Something you haven't said because you thought you shouldn't. Evelyn took a shaky breath. I'm lonely. Even though you're here, even though we spend every day together, I feel lonely because we're both so careful with each other. Like we're afraid if we show who we really are, the other person will realize they made a mistake. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I think about kissing you. Not like we did at the wedding, but really kissing you. And then I feel guilty because I promised not to push, not to expect anything you weren't ready to give. So I keep my distance even though what I really want is to be closer. The honesty of it stunned Evelyn into silence. She looked at their joined hands, at the gold band on her finger that still felt foreign, then back up at Luke's face. What if I'm not ready? What if I'm never ready? Then we figure that out together, Luke said simply. But we can't figure anything out if we're both pretending to be something we're not. That conversation marked a shift. Slowly, carefully, they began letting their guards down. Luke started asking Evelyn's opinion on ranch decisions rather than just informing her of what he'd decided. Evelyn started admitting when she was tired or overwhelmed instead of pushing through until she collapsed. They began eating breakfast on the porch together, watching the sunrise and talking about everything from cattle prices to childhood memories to the books Evelyn had been reading. One evening, about 2 months into their marriage, Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard raised voices from the yard. She looked out to see Luke in a heated discussion with a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with an aggressive stance that made her uneasy. She dried her hands and stepped outside. Is there a problem? She asked, positioning herself beside Luke. The stranger's eyes flicked to her dismissively. No problem, ma'am. Just business between your husband and me. My wife asked you a question, Luke said, his voice hard. You'll answer her respectfully, or you'll leave my property. The man's jaw tightened. Fine. I'm here about water rights. My cattle need access to the creek that runs through your northern pasture. I'm willing to pay fair price for crossing rights. And I've told you 3 times now that the answer is no, Luke said. That creek's the only reliable water source for my herd in summer. I can't risk your cattle contaminating it or drinking it dry. That's not neighborly of you, Carver. Neither is showing up at my home making demands. Luke's tone left no room for negotiation. You've got your answer. Now get off my land. The man looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Luke's stance must have convinced him it wasn't worth the fight. He spat in the dirt, shot Evelyn one more contemptuous look, and stalked back to his horse. They watched him ride off, dust rising in his wake.
Who was that? Evelyn asked. Garrett Haynes bought the property adjoining ours last year. He's been pushing boundaries ever since, trying to take advantage wherever he can. Luke's shoulders were still tense. Sorry you had to see that. I'm not sorry, Evelyn said. I'm glad I was here.
I'm your partner, remember? That means I should know about these things. She paused. Do you think he'll cause trouble? Maybe, probably. Luke sighed. Men like Haynes don't take no for an answer easily, but we'll deal with it if it comes to that. We, Evelyn repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Luke looked at her and something in his expression softened. So do I. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Luke knocked on Evelyn's door after they'd both retired. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way she rarely saw. Can we talk? He asked. Of course. Evelyn stepped back, letting him into the small guest room that had become her sanctuary. He sat in the chair by the window, and she perched on the edge of the bed, suddenly very aware that they were alone together in a bedroom. I've been thinking, Luke began, about what we talked about being honest with each other, and I realized I haven't been completely honest with you about something. Evelyn's stomach tightened. What is it? I told you on our wedding day that I didn't know what I felt for you, that it was respect and caring, and maybe the beginning of something more. Luke looked at his hands. That wasn't entirely true. I knew what I was feeling. I was just afraid to name it. Luke, let me finish. He looked up and his eyes were intense in the lamplight. I love you, Evelyn. Not might love. Not beginning to love. I love you. I think I started falling for you the day I caught you in the street, and it's just gotten stronger every day since. But I didn't tell you because I promised not to pressure you, and I didn't want you to feel obligated to say it back. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd suspected Luke's feelings ran deeper than he'd admitted, but hearing him say the words aloud was entirely different. You love me. I do. And I know you can't say it back, and that's all right. I'm not telling you this because I expect reciprocation. I'm telling you because I promised we'd be honest with each other, and keeping this to myself felt like a lie. Luke stood, moving toward the door. I'll let you get some rest. Wait. Evelyn stood too, her heart hammering. Don't go, not yet. Luke stopped, turning back to face her. I don't know if what I feel is love, Evelyn said carefully. I don't trust my own feelings enough to name them that confidently, but I know that when you're gone during the day, I miss you. I know that when something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. I know that the idea of you being hurt or in danger makes me feel like I can't breathe. She took a step closer. Maybe that's love. Maybe it's something else. But whatever it is, it's real, and it's yours. Luke closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. Can I kiss you? Really kiss you? Yes, Evelyn whispered. This kiss was nothing like the chase peck at their wedding. It was deep and searching, full of weeks of restrained longing finally allowed expression. Evelyn's arms came up around Luke's neck and his wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Evelyn found herself smiling. That was, she started. Long overdue, Luke finished. He rested his forehead against hers. I want you to know this doesn't have to go any further tonight, or any night until you're ready. That hasn't changed. What if I'm ready now? Evelyn asked, surprising herself with the words. What if I'm tired of sleeping alone, tired of being careful, tired of treating this marriage like a business arrangement when it stopped being that weeks ago? Luke pulled back slightly, searching her face. Are you sure? No, Evelyn admitted, but I'm sure about you, about us, and maybe that's enough. It was enough. That night, the careful distance they'd maintained crumbled completely, replaced by genuine intimacy built on trust and honesty. When Evelyn finally fell asleep in Luke's arms in the room that had been his alone, she felt something shift permanently inside her. The last walls she'd been holding up against him, against hope, against the possibility of real happiness, came down. She was fully in this now, fully committed, fully his wife in every sense of the word. Morning came with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. Evelyn woke to find Luke already awake, watching her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning." Evelyn stretched, comfortable in a way she hadn't been in months. "I should probably get started on breakfast." "Or," Luke suggested, "we could stay here a little longer. Tom can handle the morning chores without us for once." Evelyn laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Are you suggesting we be irresponsible, Mr. Carver?" "Just this once, Mrs. Carver." Luke pulled her closer. "I think we've earned it." They did eventually get up, but later than either of them ever slept. When they emerged from the bedroom together, Tom took one look at them and grinned knowingly, but said nothing. The rest of the day felt different somehow, lighter, easier, as if some invisible weight had finally been lifted. The weeks that followed brought their own adjustments, moving from separate rooms to sharing a bed, learning each other's habits and preferences, navigating the increased intimacy with all its complications and rewards. But they were learning together now, without pretense or careful distance. They argued sometimes about ranch decisions, about money, about whether Luke took enough care with his own safety when working with unpredictable horses. But they learned to argue fairly and resolve things without letting resentment build. Evelyn continued developing her skills with ranch management, but she also began carving out her own interests. She started a small vegetable garden that grew larger each week, eventually producing enough that they could sell surplus in town. She took over all the bookkeeping, finding satisfaction in making the numbers balance perfectly each month. And she began writing again, something she hadn't done since her parents died. Not just letters, but stories, observations, thoughts captured on paper, and filed away in the trunk that had traveled with her from St. Louis. Luke noticed the writing one evening, finding her bent over a notebook with ink-stained fingers. "What are you working on?" he asked. Evelyn looked up, caught. "Just writing. Nothing important." "Can I read it?" She hesitated, then passed him the notebook. He read in silence for several minutes, his expression thoughtful. When he looked up, his eyes were warm. "This is good, Evelyn. Really good. You have a talent for this." "It's just for myself," she deflected. "A way to process everything that's happened." "Maybe," Luke said. "But maybe it could be more. The town newspaper's always looking for contributors. You could submit some pieces, see if they'll publish them." Evelyn felt a flutter of excitement quickly suppressed by doubt. "I don't know if they're good enough for that." "Only one way to find out." Luke handed back the notebook. "Think about it. You've got a unique perspective, a woman's view of frontier life, the challenges of starting over, building something from nothing. People would want to read that." She did think about it, and eventually, nervously, she submitted a piece to the Red Hollow Gazette. To her shock, they published it the following week, and the response was immediate and positive. Women stopped her in the street to thank her for putting words to experiences they'd had but couldn't articulate. Men commented that it had given them new appreciation for what their wives and daughters faced. The editor asked for more submissions, offering to pay a small amount for each piece. It wasn't much money, but it represented something more important: validation that she had value beyond her role as Luke's wife, that she could contribute something uniquely hers to their life and community. Luke was genuinely proud, showing the published pieces to anyone who'd listen, and his support meant more to Evelyn than any amount of public praise. As summer turned to fall, a new challenge emerged. Garrett Haynes, the neighbor who'd demanded water rights, began causing problems. Cattle that belonged to Luke showed up on Haynes's property with suspiciously convenient frequency. Fence posts were mysteriously damaged in sections bordering Haynes's land. Small harassments designed to create frustration and expense without being quite egregious enough to involve the law. "He's testing you," Tom said one afternoon as they surveyed another section of downed fence. "Seeing how far he can push before you push back." "I won't give him the satisfaction of reacting," Luke said tightly. "We'll just keep repairing the damage and documenting everything." But Evelyn saw the toll it was taking on Luke, the tension in his shoulders, the way he checked and rechecked security before bed, the worry he tried to hide. She waited until they were alone that evening before raising it. "We need to address this directly," she said. "Ignoring it isn't working." "What would you suggest? Going over there and confronting him? That's just asking for a fight." "No, not confrontation. Strategy." Evelyn pulled out the notebook where she'd been tracking the incidents. Look at the pattern. He always causes trouble when you're away from the ranch, when there are fewer witnesses. And he's careful never to do anything that would hold up in court. He's counting on you either giving in or overreacting. Luke studied the notes, his expression thoughtful. So what do? We stop playing defense and start playing offense, not with violence or harassment, but with information. We document everything meticulously, dates, times, damage, costs. We make sure there are always witnesses. We involve the sheriff, get it on official record, even if individual incidents don't warrant prosecution. We build a case so solid that when Haynes finally crosses the line too far, we have everything we need to make it stick. And if he never crosses that line, Luke asked, then we have a comprehensive record showing a pattern of harassment that the bank will care about when he tries to expand his operation, that other ranchers will care about when considering whether to do business with him, that buyers will care about when evaluating his reputation. Evelyn looked up from the notebook. We make it clear that harassing us has consequences, even if they're not legal ones. Luke stared at her for a moment, then laughed, the sound surprised and admiring. When did you get so devious? I learned from experience that direct confrontation isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need to be smarter than your opponent, not stronger. Evelyn closed the notebook. So what do you think? Are you willing to try it my way? I'm willing, Luke said, on one condition. What's that? You help me implement it. This is your strategy. I want you fully involved in seeing it through. They put the plan into action immediately. Evelyn took over all documentation, creating detailed records of every incident. Luke made a point of mentioning the problems casually to other ranchers and the sheriff, establishing a public record without seeming to make a formal complaint. They hired an extra hand whose primary job was maintaining fences, but who also served as a witness to any suspicious activity. The strategy worked. Haynes continued his harassment for a few weeks, but when he realized he was being systematically documented and that his reputation was suffering, the incidents tapered off. By the time winter arrived, they'd stopped entirely. Haynes avoided Luke and Evelyn in town, and word spread that the Carvers weren't easy targets despite being relative newcomers to ranch management. Your wife's got a good head on her shoulders, Tom commented one day. Smarter than half the men in the territory and twice as strategic. Luke didn't disagree. He'd watched Evelyn grow from the broken woman who'd collapsed in his arms into someone formidable, not in spite of what she'd survived, but because of it. She'd learned to think ahead, to anticipate problems, to find solutions that didn't rely on physical strength or confrontation. And she'd brought those skills to their partnership, making them stronger together than either could be alone. Winter brought its own challenges and rewards. The ranch work slowed, giving them more time together in the evenings. They fell into comfortable routines, Evelyn writing or mending by the fire, while Luke worked on tack repair or reviewed the following season's plans. They talked more, sharing stories from their pasts that they'd never gotten around to telling before. Luke spoke of his family, the grief of losing them all so young. Evelyn shared memories of her parents, the good and the difficult, finding that the memories hurt less when shared with someone who listened without judgment. One snowy afternoon in late January, almost exactly a year after Evelyn had arrived in Red Hollow, they were in the office going over accounts when Evelyn paused, her hand resting on her stomach. What is it? Luke asked, noticing immediately. Nothing, I'm fine. But her expression was odd, somewhere between shocked and delighted. Evelyn? Luke moved closer. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright. I think I might be pregnant. Luke went very still. Are you sure? Not completely, but I'm late, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings, and just now I felt... She pressed her hand more firmly to her stomach. I don't know. Something. Luke dropped to his knees beside her chair, his hands covering hers. How long have you suspected? A week or so. I didn't want to say anything until I was more certain. But Luke, if it's true... She trailed off, emotions too tangled to sort. If it's true, then we're having a baby, Luke said, his voice full of wonder. Evelyn, that's incredible. Are you happy about it? She asked, needing to hear him say it.
Happy? I'm terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared and absolutely happy. Luke pulled her into his arms. We're going to be parents. Dr. Brennan confirmed it 2 weeks later. Evelyn was indeed pregnant, about 2 months along if his calculations were correct, with the baby due in late summer. The news spread through Red Hollow like wildfire, and the response was warmer than Evelyn had dared hope. Women who'd been cautiously friendly became genuinely welcoming, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Even Judith Marsh, the banker's wife, stopped by with a beautifully embroidered baby blanket and an invitation to join the ladies' church auxiliary. I misjudged you when you first arrived, Judith said bluntly. I thought you were taking advantage of Luke's good nature. I was wrong. You've proven yourself to be exactly what this community needs. Someone strong enough to survive hardship and smart enough to learn from it. The apology, backhanded as it was, meant more to Evelyn than Judith probably realized. It represented acceptance, not just of her presence, but of her right to be part of Red Hollow's fabric. She'd earned her place here through work and character, and people were finally seeing her as herself rather than as a story or scandal. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Evelyn's energy waned as spring arrived. Luke became impossibly protective, trying to prevent her from doing any work that involved lifting or reaching or anything he deemed potentially dangerous. It drove Evelyn to distraction. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she said after he'd forbidden her from helping repair a section of corral fence. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I'm not going to break. I know that, Luke said, but humor me. I've already lost everyone I ever loved before. The idea of something happening to you or the baby? He couldn't finish the sentence. Evelyn's irritation melted into understanding. Nothing's going to happen to us. But Luke, I need to stay active, to feel useful. Sitting around just makes me anxious. Can we compromise? I'll avoid anything genuinely risky, but let me continue doing the work I'm capable of. Trust me to know my own limits. They worked out a balance. Evelyn continued managing the books and garden, writing her newspaper pieces, and helping with lighter ranch work. Luke learned to step back and trust her judgment, though Evelyn caught him watching anxiously whenever she climbed stairs or reached for something on a high shelf. In late July, when the heat made everything shimmer and the baby was making its presence known with increasingly insistent kicks, a rider arrived with news. The bandits who'd attacked Evelyn's Stagecoach, the 3 who'd surrendered and been tried for their crimes, had been sentenced. 2 were going to prison for 20 years. The 3rd, the youngest, had received a lesser sentence after testifying against his companions and showing genuine remorse. How do you feel about that? Luke asked after the rider had left. Evelyn thought about it, one hand resting on her swollen belly. I don't know. Part of me wanted them to hang, wanted that final justice. But mostly I just feel tired of carrying it. The anger, the fear, the need for revenge. It's exhausting. She looked at Luke. They took something from me that I can never get back. My sense of safety, my innocence about how cruel people can be. But they didn't take everything. They didn't break me permanently. And holding on to hatred for them just gives them more power over my life. So you forgive them? Luke's tone was careful, non-judgmental. No, I don't think I'll ever forgive them. But I'm choosing to stop letting what they did define me. I'm choosing to focus on what I've built here instead of what I lost there. She squeezed Luke's hand. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Luke said softly. You're letting yourself move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. That takes more courage than most people ever manage. The baby arrived 3 weeks later, on a sweltering August afternoon. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Evelyn wondered if she'd survive it. But Dr. Brennan was steady and competent, and Luke refused to leave despite the doctor's suggestions that he wait outside like most fathers did. He held Evelyn's hand through every contraction, wiped sweat from her forehead, and told her she was strong enough to do this even when she was certain she wasn't. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with surprising amounts of dark hair and lungs that announced her displeasure at being born, Evelyn felt something settle deep in her soul. This tiny person, red-faced and screaming, represented everything she'd fought for: the right to choose her own path, the strength to survive and build something new, the courage to open her heart again despite every reason not to. What should we name her?
Luke asked, cradling their daughter with careful awe. Evelyn had thought about this for weeks. Hope, she said. I want to name her Hope. Luke looked at her, understanding immediately why she'd chosen that name. Hope Carver. It's perfect. The first months of parenthood were exhausting in ways neither of them had anticipated. Hope was a demanding baby, wanting to be held constantly and waking every few hours to eat. Evelyn was constantly tired, her body still recovering from childbirth while adjusting to the relentless needs of an infant. Luke did what he could, taking the baby during the day when Evelyn needed rest, pacing the floor at night when Hope wouldn't settle, learning to change diapers and burp her with the same methodical competence he brought to everything. I don't know how women do this alone, Evelyn said one particularly difficult night, tears of exhaustion streaming down her face as Hope wailed inconsolably. You're not alone, Luke reminded her, taking the baby so Evelyn could rest. We're doing this together, and we'll figure it out just like we figured out everything else. They did figure it out, slowly and with plenty of mistakes. Hope eventually settled into something resembling a schedule. Evelyn's body healed. They learned to function on less sleep, to divide responsibilities efficiently, to steal moments of connection despite the chaos. And through it all, their partnership deepened. They'd been tested by hardship before, but nothing quite prepared them for the relentless demands of caring for a tiny human who needed them for absolutely everything. Winter came again, and with it, quieter days. Hope grew stronger, began sleeping through the night occasionally, started showing the first hints of personality. She had Evelyn's determination and Luke's steady temperament, and watching her discover the world filled them both with wonder. One evening, when Hope was about 6 months old and happily amusing herself with a wooden spoon while her parents prepared dinner, a knock came at the door. Luke opened it to find a young woman standing there, road-dusty, thin, with haunted eyes that reminded him painfully of how Evelyn had looked when she'd first arrived. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said hesitantly, but I was told, someone said that if I needed help, I should come here, that you might. She trailed off, clearly embarrassed. Evelyn appeared behind Luke, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at the woman and saw herself a year and a half ago, desperate, frightened, not sure where else to turn. Come in, she said immediately. Please, you look exhausted. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I didn't know where else to go. My husband died last month, and I've been trying to make it on my own, but she broke down completely, shoulders shaking with sobs. Luke and Evelyn exchanged glances. They both knew exactly what this was, what it meant. People had started to learn that the Carvers were safe, that they helped those who had nowhere else to turn. This woman was the third to show up at their door in the past few months. Others before her had stayed a few days, gotten back on their feet, and moved on. It was becoming a pattern, a reputation. You can stay here as long as you need, Evelyn said, guiding the woman to a chair. We'll figure out the rest later. Right now, you need food and rest. As they settled the woman in the guest room and made her comfortable, Luke caught Evelyn's eye. We're doing it again, he said quietly, taking in strays. Is that a problem? Evelyn asked. No. Luke smiled slightly. It's exactly right. You remember what it was like to be where she is. You can help her in ways I never could. Evelyn thought about that later, after the woman was sleeping and Hope was tucked into her cradle and the house was finally quiet. She thought about the girl she'd been when she'd arrived in Red Hollow, broken, terrified, certain she'd never feel whole again. And she thought about who she'd become. A wife, a mother, a partner in running a successful ranch, a writer whose work people respected, someone strong enough to help others the way she'd once been helped. The journey hadn't been easy. There'd been pain and fear and moments when she'd wanted to give up. But she'd kept going, kept choosing to move forward, kept building something real and good from the ruins of what she'd lost. And now she stood here, in a home she'd helped create, with a family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back, offering the same mercy to someone else that had once been offered to her. What are you thinking about? Luke asked, coming to stand beside her at the window where she was looking out at the moonlit ranch. I was thinking about how far we've come, Evelyn said. Both of us. When you caught me that day in Red Hollow, I was convinced my life was over, that the best I could hope for was survival. I never imagined I'd end up here, with all of this." She gestured around the house, indicating everything it represented. Luke wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I was convinced I'd spend my life alone, that I'd never find someone who could be a true partner. And then you literally fell into my arms and changed everything." "We saved each other," Evelyn said softly. "No," Luke corrected gently. "We didn't save each other. We stood with each other while we both figured out how to save ourselves. That's different. Better." Evelyn leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the absolute security of knowing he'd be there tomorrow and the day after and all the days to come. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've said it enough, but I do, completely." "I know," Luke said. "I've always known. You show me every day in 100 different ways." He turned her in his arms so they were face to face. "And I love you, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." They stood there together in the quiet house, holding each other while their daughter slept and a stranger they'd welcomed found rest under their roof. Outside, the Montana winter was harsh and unforgiving, but inside there was warmth and light and the kind of love that came from choosing each other every single day. Evelyn thought about the woman sleeping in the guest room, about the journey that lay ahead of her, about the moment when she'd realized she was going to survive this. She thought about how she'd guide her, support her, help her find her own strength the way Mrs. Holloway had helped Evelyn find hers. She thought about the full circle of it all, how being broken had taught her how to help others mend, how surviving had given her the tools to help others thrive. "What are you smiling about?" Luke asked. "I'm thinking that maybe my life didn't end when those bandits attacked the Stagecoach. Maybe it actually began. Everything before was just preparation for this, for building something real with you, for becoming someone strong enough to help others, for creating a life that matters." Evelyn looked up at him. "Does that sound strange?" "No," Luke said. "It sounds true." Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask questions about how her parents had met, Evelyn would tell her the story carefully. Not the sanitized version that left out the hardship and fear, but the real story, about being hurt and finding help, about being lost and finding home, about learning that strength didn't mean never falling down, but always getting back up. She'd tell Hope that sometimes the worst moments in life led to the best ones, not because the pain wasn't real, but because it taught you what truly mattered. And Hope would understand because by then, the Carver's Ranch had become known throughout Montana as a place where people who had nowhere else to turn could find shelter and support. Evelyn and Luke helped dozens of people over the years, mostly women, but occasionally men and families too, all of them lost or broken or desperate, all of them finding their way to a place where they'd be met with compassion instead of judgment. The ranch prospered. Evelyn's writing became well known enough that a publisher in San Francisco approached her about collecting her pieces into a book. Luke's reputation as a fair and honest rancher meant he could command good prices and attract reliable workers. They added 2 more children to their family, a boy they named Thomas after Tom, who'd become like family, and another girl they named Grace because Evelyn said that's what they'd been given and what they tried to give others. But none of it came easily. There were hard years when drought threatened everything, seasons when prices fell so low they barely scraped by, illnesses that scared them, disagreements that tested their partnership. They weathered it all together, neither perfect but both committed, neither without flaws but both willing to keep working at it. Evelyn never completely forgot the bandits or the attack. She still occasionally had nightmares, still sometimes felt a flash of fear when strangers approached unexpectedly. But she learned to live with those scars, to see them as part of her story rather than the whole of it. She'd survived something terrible and built something beautiful. Both things were true, and both things mattered. The woman who'd arrived that snowy evening stayed for 3 weeks, regaining her strength and making plans for her future. When she finally left, heading to Oregon where she had distant family, she hugged Evelyn tightly and whispered, "Thank you for showing me it's possible to start over." "It's more than possible," Evelyn told her. "It's worth it. Keep going, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." After she left, Luke found Evelyn standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside her, solid and steady as always. "You did a good thing," he said, "helping her." "We did a good thing," Evelyn corrected. "I couldn't do any of this without you." "Sure you could," Luke said. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Maybe," Evelyn allowed. "But I don't want to. Do it alone, I mean. I like building this life with you. I like being part of something bigger than just myself." Luke pulled her close, and they watched the sun disappear below the horizon together. Somewhere inside, Hope was babbling to herself in her cradle. The horses were settled in the barn. The accounts were balanced. The ranch was secure. And two people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances had created something that would last. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real and honest and built to endure. Evelyn Cross Carver had arrived in Red Hollow, broken and bleeding, convinced her life was over. But standing here now, wrapped in her husband's arms with their child nearby and their future stretching bright ahead of them, she understood that she hadn't ended that day. She'd begun. And the life she'd built from those ashes was more than she'd ever dared imagine possible. She'd learned that you didn't need to be rescued to be saved. You just needed someone willing to stand with you while you found your own way forward. And then, when you were strong enough, you could be that person for someone else. That was the real gift Luke had given her. Not safety or security, though he'd provided both, but the space and support to become who she was meant to be. The stars began to emerge one by one, bright pinpoints in the darkening sky. Evelyn had learned to read them over the past year and a half, to use them for navigation when checking distant pastures. She'd learned so much: how to balance books and mend fences, how to birth calves and preserve vegetables, how to write words that mattered and speak truth that needed saying. But most importantly, she'd learned how to stand, not just to survive, but to truly live, to choose her path instead of having it chosen for her, to build instead of just enduring. And standing here now, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.